Think about the last time you truly relaxed. Not distracted, not scrolling, not sitting quietly while your mind ran through everything you still needed to do. Actually relaxed, body soft, thoughts slow, nowhere to be, nothing to manage. For some people, that memory comes easily. For others, and you may be one of them, it is surprisingly hard to find. Not because life has been terrible, not because anything catastrophic happened, just because somewhere along the way, the off switch stopped working. You lie down and your mind keeps moving. You sit in silence and something in you reaches for the phone without deciding to. You take a day off and spend it waiting, a little restlessly, for the day off to be over. You get enough sleep, sometimes, and wake up tired anyway. Not groggy, tired, like the sleep passed through you without quite touching you. And if someone asked how you were doing, you would probably say, fine. Busy, a little tired. The usual. Most people stop there. They accept it as the texture of adult life. They assume that this is just what it feels like to be a person with responsibilities in a complicated world. But there is something underneath that assumption worth looking at more closely. Some people haven't felt fully relaxed in years. Not because life is terrible, but because their nervous system never received the signal that it was safe to stop. Notice, right now, where your shoulders are sitting. Not to move them, just to notice. Are they somewhere near your ears? Is there a low, almost invisible clenching in your jaw? Is your stomach holding itself carefully, as if bracing for something that is not actually coming? Most people who check find more tension than they expected. And the most striking part is not the tension itself. It is that they had completely stopped noticing it. This is what happens when the body has been on alert for a long time. The tension does not feel like tension anymore. It feels like normal. The low hum of readiness that runs beneath your day. The scanning, the slight bracing, the part of you that is always faintly listening for the next thing, stops registering as stress. It becomes the background, the baseline, the invisible condition of just being you. Your nervous system calls this survival. You call it Tuesday. Your nervous system is not dramatic. It does not exaggerate. It simply responds to what it believes is true. And right now, for many of you listening, it believes that the world requires your constant attention. Not occasional attention, constant. Even when nothing is happening, even when the day is quiet, even when, by any reasonable measure, everything is fine. And here is what makes this so difficult to see from the inside. It does not feel like anxiety. It feels like being responsible, like caring, like staying on top of things. The nervous system doesn't announce when it's dysregulated. It just makes alertness feel like personality. Inside your body, there are two modes, two settings the nervous system moves between. One is the activated state. This is where the heart rate rises, the breath shallows, the muscles tighten. This is the mode built for action, for response, for getting through something hard. It is not a bad mode. It is a necessary one. Your body tightens before your mind even understands why. That speed is the whole point. It was designed to save your life. The other mode is where rest actually happens, where digestion works, where sleep restores, where the body repairs itself in all the quiet, invisible ways it needs to. You were designed to spend most of your time there. Most people reading this are not spending most of their time there. Not even close. Because the nervous system does not know the difference between a deadline and a predator. It cannot distinguish between a difficult email and genuine physical danger. It receives a signal. Something here requires alertness, and it responds. Every notification, every piece of difficult news, every moment of social uncertainty, every unfinished task, every half-formed worry that surfaces at 2 in the morning. Each one a small alarm. Each one small enough to dismiss. Each one accumulated over days and months and years, tilting the body incrementally further from rest and closer to a state of permanent, low-level readiness that slowly, quietly becomes home. And the strange part is, you stop noticing. The body adapted so completely that the tension stopped feeling like tension. The shallow breathing stopped feeling shallow. The tiredness stopped feeling like a signal and started feeling like a personality trait. I've always been someone who needs a lot of sleep. I've always been a worrier. I've just never been good at switching off. You were never meant to live this alert for this long. What you have normalized is not your nature. It is your nervous system, exhausted, doing its best. Here is what nobody tells you about chronic exhaustion. It is not always loud. It does not always look like burnout or breakdown. Sometimes it looks like a person who is perfectly functional, perfectly capable, perfectly fine from the outside, and quietly, persistently depleted on the inside. Someone who pushes through, who manages, who keeps going because stopping feels, for reasons they cannot quite articulate, more frightening than continuing. If any part of that sounds familiar, keep listening. Because what we are going to explore through this audiobook is not another system for managing yourself better. It is something quieter and more fundamental than that. It is the slow, gentle process of teaching your body that it is allowed to come down, that the alertness can ease. That rest is not a reward for productivity or a luxury for people with simpler lives. It is a biological necessity that your nervous system has been quietly starving for. And it starts smaller than you think. Not with a new routine or a restructured day. With something as simple as this. Right now, while you are listening, see if you can let your shoulders drop just slightly. Not dramatically, just a fraction. And take one breath, just one, where the exhale is a little longer than the inhale. Let it leave slowly, like something releasing rather than ending. That small thing, that 30-second thing, just sent a signal through your entire nervous system. A signal that says, we are safe enough, right now, to ease a little. That is where this work begins. In moments that small, in signals that quiet. Your nervous system does not need a dramatic intervention. It needs patient, repeated evidence that the world has become slightly safer than it believed. There are 3 questions I want to leave open as we move through this section together. Why does rest so often fail to restore you, even when you get enough of it? Why does the body stay tense even in objectively safe moments? And why do so many people feel this specific kind of exhaustion, functional, invisible, impossible to fully explain, that sleep and weekends and holidays never quite touch? We will come back to all 3. But first, before the explanations and the understanding and the habits that will slowly begin to change things, I want you to simply sit with this for a moment. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not someone who has failed at relaxing or resting or managing the ordinary demands of being alive. You are someone whose nervous system has been working very hard for a very long time, in a world that gives it almost no permission to stop. And the exhaustion you carry, the kind that lives in the jaw and the shoulders and the too shallow breath, is not a character flaw. It is a record, a physical record of everything your body has held on your behalf for longer than it was designed to. It deserves more than management. It deserves recovery. And that recovery, slow, quiet, and entirely real, is exactly what this audiobook is here to begin. Section 2, Survival Mode. When your body is always preparing for something that never comes. Think about what Sunday evening feels like. Not the whole weekend, just that specific hour. The light changing outside. The day winding down. Nothing immediately wrong. And yet something. A low, formless tension that arrives without invitation. A vague sense that the week ahead is already pressing in. A restlessness that makes it hard to fully enjoy the quiet. Even though the quiet is exactly what you said you wanted. Most people feel this. Most people have no name for it. They just call it Sunday. They assume it is normal. They assume everyone feels this way. And that assumption, that quiet, unchallenged assumption, is where survival mode hides. Survival mode does not always look like crisis. It does not always feel like panic or emergency or the kind of stress that makes your hands shake. Most of the time, it looks remarkably ordinary. It looks like a person sitting on the sofa who cannot quite settle. A person who picks up their phone not because they want to but because stillness, for reasons they cannot explain, feels vaguely uncomfortable. A person who is physically present in a peaceful room and mentally somewhere else entirely. Running through tomorrow, replaying yesterday, half listening to a conversation while another part of their mind scans the horizon for whatever has not happened yet. That scanning. That constant, low-level scanning. That is the signature of survival mode. You sit down to rest, but part of you keeps watching the door. Not because something is coming, Because your body forgot that nothing is. Here is what survival mode actually is, stripped of all clinical language. It is the state your nervous system enters when it has decided, based on everything it has experienced, everything it has learned to expect, that the world cannot quite be trusted to be okay without your vigilance. That problems do not get caught unless you are watching for them. That safety is not a given, but something that must be actively maintained, continuously, through alertness and readiness and the kind of careful, forward-facing attention that never fully rests. Your body does not experience this as suffering. It experiences it as responsibility. And that is what makes it so invisible. Because from the inside, survival mode feels productive. It feels conscientious. It feels like being the kind of person who cares, who stays on top of things, who does not let important details slip through. The hypervigilance does not feel like hypervigilance. It feels like thoroughness. The overthinking does not feel like a nervous system in overdrive. It feels like being thorough, being careful, being the person who thought about it when nobody else did. Most people living in survival mode believe they are simply good at being an adult. The exhausting part is not the problems you handle. It is the ones you are constantly bracing for that never arrive. Think about the last time you were in a genuinely quiet room. No demands, no tasks, nothing urgent, and you felt completely at ease in it. Not entertained, not distracted, just quietly, fully at ease. No background restlessness, no low-grade guilt about resting, no part of your mind already moving toward the next thing. How long ago was that? For some people, the answer is years. Not because anything terrible happened, not because they are anxious people, clinically speaking, but because the nervous system, over a long enough period of relentless demand and insufficient recovery, gradually recalibrates. The threshold for what feels normal shifts upward. The body, adapting to its environment the way bodies always do, begins to treat alertness not as a temporary response, but as the correct default. And slowly, without announcement, the memory of what genuine ease felt like grows faint. You stop calling it stress because it stopped feeling like stress. It just felt like you. The frightening part is how quietly that happens. There are physical signs, and you probably know most of them, even if you have not connected them to this. The jaw that is almost always slightly clenched. The shoulders that live closer to the ears than they should. The breath that stays shallow through most of the day, never quite dropping into the belly. The way you are never fully sitting back in a chair, always slightly forward, slightly ready, slightly poised for the next thing. The way a sudden noise makes your heart beat harder than the noise deserved. These are not personality traits. They are posture. The physical posture of a body that has been on alert for too long. And the body always tells the truth first. The nervous system adapts to chaos surprisingly fast. What takes much longer is convincing it that the chaos has stopped. There is an emotional dimension to survival mode that rarely gets named. When the nervous system runs on high alert for long enough, something begins to narrow. Not quite depression, not quite numbness. Something more subtle than either, a gentle flattening of the peaks. The joy that arrives, but does not quite land the way it used to. The beautiful moment that you are inside, but somehow also watching from a slight distance. The holiday that is objectively lovely, and yet somehow does not produce the rest you were hoping for. Life starts feeling muted, even during good moments. This is one of the most privately distressing features of long-term survival mode, and one of the least talked about, because it is so difficult to explain. How do you tell someone that you feel fine, and that everything is going well, and that your life contains genuinely good things, and that underneath all of it there is a persistent, low, inexplicable flatness that you cannot account for? Most people do not say this out loud. They assume it is ingratitude. They assume it means they want too much. It does not mean either of those things. It means the nervous system is exhausted. And exhausted nervous systems do not experience joy the way rested ones do. You are not meant to feel this muted. The flatness is not your personality. It is your body, depleted, doing its best to keep you moving. Here is what I want you to hold from this section, gently, without pressure. The survival mode you may have been living in did not arrive because something is wrong with you. It arrived because something was asked of you, consistently, over a long period of time, and your nervous system rose to meet it. Every time, without complaint, because that is what nervous systems do. They adapt to the world they are given. The world they were given was a demanding one, and so they adapted toward readiness, toward vigilance, toward the kind of careful, constant alertness that kept you functioning, that helped you manage and cope and get through. And that cost you, quietly and over time, the ability to fully arrive in your own life. That cost is real. It is worth naming, and it is not permanent. The body that learned to brace can learn, slowly, to release. That is not a promise. It is a biological fact, and it is where we are headed. In the next section, we are going to look at something that many people find unexpectedly relieving. Why rest, even when you get enough of it, so often fails to restore you, and what genuine recovery actually requires. Because it is not more sleep. It is something quieter and more specific than that. Keep listening. Section 3. Why rest doesn't restore you. The exhaustion that sleep can't fix. You can sleep 8 hours and still wake up tired. Not groggy, not needing another 30 minutes. Genuinely, deeply tired. In a way that feels like the sleep did not quite reach you. Like you were horizontal for 8 hours, but your body was somewhere else entirely. Like you closed your eyes and your mind simply kept running, quieter perhaps, but running. And in the morning, you open your eyes and the tiredness is still there, waiting. If you have experienced this, you are not alone. And you are not broken. But you may have been given the wrong explanation for what is happening. The explanation most people receive is simple. You are not sleeping enough or not sleeping well enough. Get more sleep. Improve your sleep hygiene. Cut the caffeine, dim the lights, put your phone in another room. And those things are not bad advice. But for many people, perhaps for you, they do not solve the core problem. Because the core problem is not the sleep itself. The core problem is that the nervous system never received the signal that it was safe enough to truly rest. Rest without safety is just stillness with your eyes closed. Here is what happens in the body during genuine, restorative sleep. The nervous system shifts deeply into its parasympathetic state. Heart rate drops. Breathing slows and deepens. The stress hormone cortisol, which should follow a natural daily rhythm, rising in the morning, falling through the evening, reaching its lowest point in the early hours of sleep, settles into that low valley and stays there. The brain moves through its cycles of light and deep sleep, consolidating memory, clearing metabolic waste, repairing tissue. The immune system activates. The body does its quiet, essential maintenance work. This is what sleep is supposed to be. This is what the body is capable of, given the right conditions. But when the nervous system is dysregulated, when it has been operating in a chronic state of low-level threat response, those conditions are never quite met. Cortisol, which should be low at night, remains elevated. The brain, trained by months or years of hypervigilance, continues its scanning even in sleep. It listens, it monitors, it stays, in some quiet part of itself, alert. And in that state, the deepest and most restorative phases of sleep become harder to reach and harder to sustain. The body gets rest in the most technical sense. The hours pass, the eyes stay closed, but the deep repair, the kind that leaves you feeling genuinely renewed, does not fully happen. And so you wake still carrying what you brought to bed with you. A nervous system on alert does not sleep the same way a nervous system at peace does. The hours may be identical. The restoration is not. This also explains something that many exhausted people notice but rarely discuss: the strange, unsatisfying quality of time off. You take a weekend, you take a holiday, you take a week away from work, from responsibilities, from everything that usually demands your attention. And yet somewhere in the middle of that time, maybe on the second day, maybe the third, you notice that the relief you were hoping for has not quite arrived. There is a pleasant absence of demands, yes, but underneath it, the tension is still there. The mental noise is still there. The feeling of needing to do something, be somewhere, prepare for something. It persists, quieter but present, like a radio playing in another room. This is not ingratitude. This is not an inability to enjoy life. This is a nervous system that does not know how to use stillness as a resource because it was never trained to. It was trained through experience, through environment, through the accumulated weight of a very full life, to treat stillness as a gap, as a moment before the next thing, not as restoration in its own right. And so the body, even when given time to rest, does not know what to do with it. There is another dimension to this that is worth naming. For people who carry a lot of responsibility, for others, for outcomes, for the future, the mind rarely receives permission to be fully off duty. Even during sleep, even during holidays, some part of the mental system remains on call, running background checks, anticipating problems, holding the shape of everything that needs to be managed when the quiet is over. This is sometimes called cognitive load, but that phrase does not quite capture how it feels. It feels less like carrying a heavy bag and more like never being able to put a bag down. Even when you are sitting, even when you are still, the weight is always there because you are the one responsible for it, and there is no shelf to set it on. Exhaustion is not always about how much you are doing. Sometimes it is about how rarely you are allowed to stop being responsible for anything at all. So what does genuine rest actually require? It requires something that cannot be scheduled or optimized or achieved through better sleep hygiene alone. It requires the nervous system to receive and to believe a signal that it is genuinely safe to release, that the scanning can stop, that nothing needs managing right now, that the world will continue to exist without your vigilance for a few hours, and that you are allowed to be fully, completely, temporarily off. That signal does not come from going to bed earlier. It comes from slowly, repeatedly, gently teaching the nervous system that safe moments exist, that stillness can be trusted, that rest is not a gap between threats, but a legitimate state in its own right. That is the work this audiobook is moving toward. And it begins not with sleep tricks or wellness routines, but with understanding, which is exactly what you are doing right now. In the next section, we're going to look at something that most people sense but have never clearly seen: how the texture of ordinary modern life quietly and relentlessly overloads the nervous system, one small input at a time. Stay with me. Section 4: Overstimulation. How the modern world quietly overwhelms the body. Your brain was not designed for this. Not for the notifications. Not for the news cycle that never closes, never resolves, never reaches a moment where you can reasonably say, that is enough information for today. Not for the group chats that run through the night, the emails that arrive before you have gotten out of bed, the screen that is the first thing you reach for in the morning and the last thing you look at before sleep. Not for the ambient, unrelenting noise of a life lived in permanent connection with everything and everyone at once. Your brain was designed for a quieter world, a slower one where information arrived in manageable pieces, where the day had a natural shape, where darkness meant rest and silence meant safety. That is the world your nervous system was built inside, and it is not the world you are living in. This is not a complaint about technology. It is not nostalgia for a simpler time. It is a simple biological fact. The human nervous system has a finite capacity for input, and modern life, almost by design, exceeds that capacity every single day. The nervous system does not grade threats by size. A harsh comment online and a near miss in traffic register in the same part of the same brain. The alarm sounds the same either way. Think about what a typical morning looks like for most people. The alarm pulls you out of sleep, already a mild jolt to the system. Within minutes, the phone is in hand. There are messages. There is news. There is something that requires a response, or something that provokes a feeling, or something that demands a small decision before the day has properly begun. By the time breakfast is over, the nervous system has already processed dozens of micro-inputs, each one small, none of them particularly alarming, but each one requiring the brain to evaluate, categorize, and respond. And that is before the day actually starts. This is what researchers sometimes call cognitive load, but the experience of it is less like carrying weight and more like being lightly tapped, hundreds of times, in exactly the same spot. Each tap is nothing. The cumulative effect, over hours, over days, is a tenderness that becomes impossible to ignore. The nervous system, remember, is always monitoring. It is always asking, is this safe? Does this require my attention? Should I act? Every notification is a small question. Every piece of news is a small evaluation. Every social interaction, even a digital one, even a passing one, requires the nervous system to briefly orient, assess, and respond. None of these moments is a crisis, but none of them is rest either. And they add up, quietly and relentlessly, into a kind of sensory and emotional debt that the body carries forward into every evening, every weekend, every holiday. You are not tired because you did too much today. You are tired because your nervous system has been making thousands of tiny decisions since the moment you woke up, and nobody told it that it was allowed to stop. There is also something specific worth naming about the role of social media and the attention economy in all of this. The platforms that occupy so much of modern life were not designed with your nervous system in mind. They were designed for engagement, for return visits, for the particular psychological loop that keeps you scrolling not because you are enjoying it, but because something in you cannot quite stop. That loop is not a character flaw. It is dopamine mechanics. Every scroll is a small search for reward, a post that makes you laugh, a piece of news that confirms something you already believed, a photo that provokes a feeling. The brain, which is wired to seek novelty and reward, responds to that loop willingly. But the cost is a kind of low-grade activation that mimics the stress response. The searching, the scanning, the slight tension of not knowing what is coming next. Over time, this trains the nervous system toward a state of constant, ambient alertness that feels normal but is quietly exhausting. And then there is something quieter but equally important: the loss of silence. Most people in the modern world rarely experience genuine silence anymore. There is almost always something playing: music, a podcast, background television, the ambient noise of a city. And while none of these things is harmful in isolation, the cumulative effect is a nervous system that is never quite given permission to simply be with itself. Silence has become uncomfortable for many people, not because silence is unpleasant, but because an overstimulated nervous system has lost the ability to rest inside it. Quiet feels like something is missing, like something should be filling the space. That discomfort with silence is itself a symptom, a signal. It is the nervous system telling you, in the only language it has, that it has forgotten how to not be stimulated. The capacity to sit in silence without reaching for something, without filling the space, is one of the quietest and most important forms of nervous system health there is. The good news, and there is genuinely good news here, is that overstimulation is not permanent damage. The nervous system is responsive. It adjusts to its environment, which means that when the environment changes, even gradually, even slightly, the nervous system begins to change with it. Reducing input, even in small ways, has real and measurable effects on the body's baseline level of activation. The brain, given less noise to process, begins to quiet. The threshold for feeling overwhelmed slowly rises. The window of tolerance, the range within which you can handle the ordinary difficulties of life without being flooded, gradually widens. This does not require a retreat. It does not require deleting your phone or moving to the countryside. It requires something far more achievable: a small, consistent intention to give your nervous system moments of genuine low stimulation every day, to build pockets of quiet into a loud life, to begin, slowly and without drama, to make the world your nervous system lives in a little bit smaller, a little bit softer, a little bit safer. That is what we are building toward. And in the next section, we are going to get much more physical about it, because the nervous system does not just live in the mind. It lives in the body. It lives in the way you breathe, in the tension in your jaw, in the tightness across your chest that you have probably stopped noticing. We are going to notice it now. Section 5. The body keeps the score: how stored tension lives in your muscles and breath. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually try it rather than just think about it. Right now, wherever you are, sitting, lying down, walking, driving, bring your attention to your shoulders. Not to move them, just to notice them. Notice where they are. Notice how high they are sitting. Notice whether there is any space between them and your ears, or whether they have quietly, without your permission, been creeping upward for the last hour. Now notice your jaw. Is it loose? Or is there a faint clenching there? So habitual you stopped feeling it as tension and started feeling it as just the way your face sits? Check your stomach. Is it soft? Or is there a low, constant bracing somewhere in your abdomen? A mild holding that has become so familiar it no longer registers as anything at all? Most people who do this exercise discover the same thing. They were tenser than they realized, considerably tenser. And the most striking part is not the tension itself. It is that they had stopped noticing it. It had become the background, the baseline, the invisible condition of simply being in their own body. Your body has been trying to tell you something for a long time. You have just been too busy to listen. This is what it means when people say the body keeps the score. It is not a metaphor. It is a description of something real and physical. The way that unprocessed stress, unresolved tension, and years of low-level activation leave their marks not just in the mind, but in the tissue, in the muscles, in the fascia, in the way you hold yourself when you think nobody is watching, in the shallow, quiet, careful way that many chronically stressed people have learned to breathe. Let us talk about breath for a moment, because it is one of the most important and most overlooked windows into the state of the nervous system. When the body is in a state of safety, breath is slow, deep, and diaphragmatic. The belly rises and falls. The inhale and exhale are roughly equal in length. The whole process is unhurried. The body, in this state, is using breath the way it was designed, as a natural, automatic regulator. Every slow exhale activates the vagus nerve, the long wandering nerve that runs from the brainstem down through the chest and into the abdomen, touching almost every major organ on its way. Every slow exhale sends a signal through that nerve, calm, safe, at ease, that ripples through the entire system. But when the body is in a state of activation, when the nervous system is running on alert, breath changes. It becomes shallower. It moves up into the chest rather than down into the belly. The exhale shortens. The inhale quickens. And in this pattern, the vagus nerve receives the opposite signal. Not calm, not safe, alert, prepare. The breath becomes not a regulator, but an amplifier, quietly reinforcing the very state it should be releasing. And most people who live with chronic stress have been breathing this way for so long that it feels completely normal. They do not experience it as shallow breathing. They experience it as just breathing. The body has adapted so thoroughly that its compromised pattern has become invisible. Shallow breathing is not just a symptom of anxiety. Over time, it becomes one of its causes. The body and the breath are in constant conversation, and most of us have never been taught to listen to that conversation. The same is true of muscular tension. The body, when it is preparing for threat, contracts. Muscles tighten. Posture changes. The whole physical form draws inward, slightly, as if making itself smaller, harder, more defended. In the short term, this is protective. In the long term, when the contraction never fully releases, when the muscles never quite get the signal to soften, it becomes a form of chronic pain, chronic fatigue, and chronic discomfort that most people attribute to anything other than what it actually is: stored activation that the body never got to discharge. You may recognize this in specific places: the neck that is always stiff, the shoulders that ache by mid-afternoon, the headaches that cluster at the base of the skull, the tight band across the chest that sometimes, for a moment, makes you wonder if something is wrong with your heart, the stomach that holds itself carefully, as if it is waiting for something. These are not random. These are not just the inevitable wear of getting older. These are the physical signatures of a nervous system that has been working very hard for a very long time. And here is the part that matters most. The body is not just a passive recorder of stress. It is also one of the most direct routes back to regulation, because the nervous system is bidirectional. Just as the mind can send signals of threat down into the body, tightening the muscles, shallowing the breath, raising the heart rate, the body can send signals of safety back up into the mind. A long, slow exhale tells the brain to lower its guard. Deliberately relaxed shoulders send a message upward through the system. Nothing is being defended against right now. Warmth on the skin, weight felt in the body, slow and rhythmic movement. All of these are physical inputs that the nervous system reads as evidence of safety and responds to accordingly. This is why body-based practices, breath work, gentle movement, physical grounding, are not luxuries or wellness trends. They are direct interventions in the nervous system's most fundamental language. They speak to the part of you that words cannot always reach. You cannot always think your way to calm, but you can breathe your way there. You can feel your way there. The body has always known the way. It just needs permission to begin. In the next section, we finally begin to move from understanding toward action. We are going to look at the small, specific, genuinely achievable habits that can slowly shift the nervous system's baseline, not through discipline or effort, but through repetition, gentleness, and consistency. The work is simpler than you think, and it starts smaller than you expect. Section 6. Small habits that calm. The micro-behaviors that slowly rewire the nervous system. Healing does not always look the way we expect it to. We tend to imagine it as a turning point, a decision, a moment where something shifts dramatically and the person on the other side is noticeably different from the person who walked in. We want the transformation to be visible, to be earned, to feel proportionate to how long we have been struggling. And so when someone suggests that what might help is something small, something quiet, something that takes 30 seconds, there is a part of us that resists. Surely it cannot be that simple. Surely something this broken requires something more significant to fix it. But the nervous system does not respond to significance. It responds to repetition. It responds to consistency. It responds to the slow, patient accumulation of small signals that, taken together, begin to revise its understanding of what is normal, what is safe, what the world actually requires of it. Large changes are hard to sustain. They require willpower, which is a finite resource, and they demand a version of yourself that may not yet exist. The calmer, more regulated person you are trying to become. Small habits, on the other hand, ask almost nothing. They slip into the day without disrupting it. They do not require motivation or perfect conditions. And because they are easy to repeat, they actually get repeated. And repetition, in the nervous system, is everything. You do not rewire a nervous system by trying harder. You rewire it by showing up gently, again and again, in the same quiet direction. So let us talk about what those small habits actually look like. Not as a prescription, not as a checklist, but as a collection of possibilities, gentle, accessible things you might begin to weave into the fabric of your day, each one a small signal to the body that something is changing. The first, and perhaps the most immediately powerful, is the extended exhale. You already know from the last section that the exhale activates the vagus nerve and sends a calming signal through the entire nervous system. What you may not know is how quickly this happens. You do not need 20 minutes of breathing exercises to feel the effect. A single long, slow exhale, longer than the inhale, begins to shift the nervous system within seconds. Try it now if you like. Breathe in for a count of 4. Breathe out for a count of 7 or 8. Let the exhale be slow and unforced, like air leaving a balloon that you are simply allowing to empty. That slight slowing, that slight lengthening, that is the vagus nerve receiving its signal. That is the body beginning to understand that it is allowed to release. You do not need to do this for 10 minutes. You need to do it once, then again, at a red light, before a difficult conversation, in the 30 seconds between putting your phone down and picking it up again. The dose is small. The frequency is what matters. The second habit is what some researchers call an orienting response. And it is so simple, it almost sounds too simple to mention. When the nervous system is locked in threat mode, attention narrows. The visual field tightens. The gaze goes inward or fixes on a single point. This is useful when there is a real threat to track. But in the absence of a real threat, this narrowed focus actually maintains the stress response. It signals to the brain that something specific still requires watching. The antidote is to deliberately widen your gaze, to slowly look around the room, to let your eyes move softly across your environment, across the ceiling, the walls, the window, the middle distance, without fixing on anything. This slow, gentle visual sweep activates a part of the nervous system associated with safety and exploration rather than threat and defense. The brain receives a message: I have looked. Nothing here requires my alarm. It is, quite literally, one of the simplest ways to tell your nervous system that the immediate environment is safe. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for your nervous system is simply to look slowly around the room you are already in and allow your body to register that nothing here is trying to harm you. The third habit is the transition ritual, a small, consistent behavior that marks the shift from one context to another, from work to home, from screen to dinner, from the end of the day to the beginning of rest. The nervous system does not transition well on its own. It carries the emotional residue of one context forward into the next, which is why so many people arrive home from work still mentally at work, or lie down at night still running through the events of the day. A transition ritual, something small and physical and consistent, acts as a reset signal. It tells the body, that chapter is closing. This one is beginning. You are allowed to let the previous one go. It does not need to be elaborate. Changing clothes when you get home. Making a cup of tea with deliberate slowness. Stepping outside for 3 minutes before shifting from one task to the next. Washing your hands and letting the sensation of the water be something you actually notice, rather than something you perform automatically. The content of the ritual matters far less than its consistency, because consistency is the language the nervous system understands best. Do the same small thing, in the same sequence, at the same transition, and over time the body begins to respond to it before you have even consciously registered what is happening. The ritual becomes a cue. The cue becomes a physical release. None of these habits will transform your nervous system this week. That is not what they are for. They are the beginning of a conversation. A long, patient, gentle conversation between you and a body that has been waiting for longer than you perhaps realize for someone to speak to it kindly. The nervous system does not need grand gestures. It needs evidence. Small, repeated, trustworthy evidence that the world has become a little bit safer than it was before. In the next section, we are going to look at something that sits underneath all of these habits: the role of dopamine and why the exhausted brain, left to its own devices, will always reach for stimulation over stillness. Understanding this is what makes the habit stick. Keep going. Section 7. Dopamine and the exhausted brain. Why your mind won't stop seeking. Have you ever picked up your phone without meaning to? Not because you had a reason. Not because a notification arrived or someone was trying to reach you. You just reached for it. The hand moved before the mind decided anything. One moment you were sitting quietly, and the next the screen was in your hand and your thumb was already moving, already scrolling through something you did not choose to open, looking for something you could not have named. And then, a few minutes later, you put it down. Not satisfied, not refreshed, just done for now, until the hand reaches again. If that sounds familiar, you are not weak-willed. You are not addicted in any clinical sense. You are experiencing something far more ordinary and far more understandable than either of those explanations. You are experiencing a dopamine-depleted brain doing the only thing it knows how to do when its reserves run low. Seek. Search. Reach for the next thing that might, briefly, make it feel something. The brain that cannot stop scrolling is not an undisciplined brain. It is a depleted brain looking for relief in the only places it has learned to look. To understand why this matters for the nervous system, we need to spend a moment with dopamine itself. Not in the way it is usually presented, as the pleasure chemical, the reward molecule, the thing that makes you feel good. That description is technically incomplete, and the incomplete version leads to incomplete understanding. Dopamine is not primarily a pleasure chemical. It is an anticipation chemical. It is released not when you receive a reward, but when you expect one. It is the neurological sensation of almost, of reaching towards something, of the gap between where you are and where you might be in a moment. This is why the scroll feels compelling even when nothing on the screen is actually enjoyable. The dopamine is not in the finding. It is in the looking. And because looking is always available, the loop never needs to close. In a healthy, well-regulated nervous system, dopamine operates within a natural rhythm. Anticipation rises, reward arrives, satisfaction follows, and then the system rests before the next cycle begins. The key word there is rests. There is a recovery period built into the design, a quiet interval where the brain replenishes, recalibrates, and prepares for the next genuine source of meaning and motivation. But in a nervous system that is constantly stimulated, constantly offered the next notification, the next headline, the next piece of content specifically engineered to provoke a reaction, that recovery period never arrives. The dopamine system is kept in a state of permanent, low-grade activation, always seeking, never quite arriving, never fully at rest. And over time, this does something subtle but significant. The brain, flooded with so many small dopamine signals, begins to raise its threshold. What satisfied it before no longer does. The ordinary pleasures of life, a quiet morning, a slow meal, a conversation without an agenda, the texture of sunlight on a wall, begin to register as less rewarding than they once did. Not because those things have changed, but because the brain has recalibrated its baseline so far upward that quiet beauty no longer clears the bar. When the brain is saturated with stimulation, ordinary life begins to feel flat. Not because ordinary life is insufficient, but because the nervous system has lost the sensitivity to receive it. This is the hidden cost of chronic overstimulation that almost nobody talks about. It is not just that you feel tired or anxious or overwhelmed. It is that the things that used to make life feel worth living, simple things, slow things, the kind of things that do not require a screen or a purchase or a plan, begin to feel colorless, boring, not enough. And so you reach for more stimulation, which raises the threshold further, which makes ordinary life feel even flatter, which makes you reach again. The loop is self-reinforcing, and most people inside it do not recognize it as a loop. They recognize it as a personality. They say, I have always needed a lot of stimulation. I get bored easily. I am just someone who needs to be busy. And some of that may be true, temperamentally. But much of what gets attributed to personality is actually a nervous system that has been so thoroughly trained towards seeking that stillness has become genuinely uncomfortable. Not because the person is wired that way, but because the system has been shaped that way, gradually, by 10,000 small choices made in moments of discomfort or emptiness or the simple human desire to feel something. The way back is not deprivation. It is not a digital detox or a strict screen time limit or a punishing schedule of enforced boredom. Those approaches treat the symptom, not the system, and they tend to produce the same rebound that any form of restriction produces. The nervous system, denied its usual inputs, simply waits. And the moment the restriction lifts, it returns to exactly where it was. The way back is gentler and more interesting than that. It is the slow, patient restoration of sensitivity, the gradual recalibration of the brain's threshold back toward a point where small things register again, where a walk without headphones feels like something rather than nothing, where sitting with a warm drink and no agenda produces actual quietness rather than restless discomfort, where boredom, instead of triggering an immediate reach for stimulation, becomes something that can be briefly sat with, and then, slowly, something that resolves not into distraction but into thought, or rest, or the particular kind of creativity that only arrives in genuinely unoccupied minds. The ability to be still without reaching for something is not a small thing. It is one of the most honest measures of nervous system health there is, and it can be rebuilt, slowly, gently, one quiet moment at a time. In the next section, we are going to go deeper than habits and dopamine. We are going to look at something that sits underneath all of it. The question of whether your nervous system actually believes it is safe. Not whether you know you are safe, whether your body believes it. That distinction, it turns out, changes everything. Stay with me. Section 8. Learning to feel safe. Rebuilding the internal signal that says it's okay now. For some people, calm does not feel like relief. It feels like a warning. There is a particular kind of person, and you may recognize yourself in this, for whom stillness carries a faint edge of unease, where relaxing fully, letting the guard down completely, feels not peaceful but exposed. Where a quiet evening, objectively safe and pleasant, produces a low, unnamed anxiety that sits just beneath the surface. Where the mind, given nothing to manage, begins to search for something. Because something in the nervous system has learned, over a long period of time, that alertness is safety, and that the absence of alertness is not peace. It is vulnerability. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something important. This is not a character flaw. It is not anxiety in the clinical sense, necessarily. And it is not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It is evidence that your nervous system, at some point in your history, learned a very understandable lesson. That staying alert kept you protected. That watching for the next thing, anticipating the next problem, never quite letting yourself fully land. That this was how you stayed ahead of whatever was coming. And it worked. Whatever it was protecting you from, it worked. Your nervous system did its job. But the lesson it learned in doing that job has outlasted its usefulness. And now it runs in the background of a life that no longer requires it, producing a felt sense of unease in situations that are, by any objective measure, completely fine. The nervous system does not know the difference between a threat that is present and a threat that has passed. It only knows what it was taught to expect, and it keeps expecting it long after the teacher has left the room. This is the distinction that changes everything, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. There is a difference between knowing you are safe and feeling safe. These are not the same experience, and they do not live in the same part of the brain. Knowing is cognitive. It lives in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that reasons, evaluates, and makes judgments. Feeling is somatic. It lives in the body, in the older, deeper, faster parts of the nervous system that do not speak in logic or language, that speak in sensation, in muscle tone, in the quality of the breath, in the felt sense of whether this moment can be trusted. You can know, intellectually, that you are completely safe, that your home is secure, your life is stable, the people around you are kind, and your nervous system can still be running a quiet alarm. Because the alarm is not responding to your thoughts. It is responding to its own learned history. And learned history does not update itself just because the circumstances have changed. It updates through experience, through repeated, embodied encounters with safety that gradually, over time, teach the nervous system a new expectation. This is why talk alone is often not enough. Why understanding the problem intellectually, knowing why you feel the way you feel, being able to explain it clearly, even having significant insight into your own patterns, does not always produce the relief you expect it to. Because insight lives in one part of the brain, and the alarm lives somewhere else entirely. You need to speak to it in its own language. The language of the body. The language of sensation, rhythm, warmth, weight, and repeated safe experience. Understanding why you feel unsafe is valuable. But the nervous system does not become calm through understanding. It becomes calm through experience, through the body learning again and again that it is allowed to soften. So what does that actually look like? How do you teach a nervous system that has spent years on alert that it is, in fact, allowed to rest? It begins with what researchers call co-regulation, the deeply human experience of the nervous system calming in the presence of another calm nervous system. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable biological phenomenon. When you are in the presence of someone whose nervous system is genuinely regulated, whose voice is unhurried, whose body is relaxed, who is not radiating urgency or anxiety, your own nervous system begins to entrain to theirs. Heart rates synchronize, breathing slows, the threat response quiets. This is why certain people leave you feeling more at ease, and others leave you feeling vaguely wound up even after a perfectly pleasant conversation. You are not imagining it. Your nervous systems are in constant, wordless dialogue. This is also why a calm voice, the voice of someone who speaks slowly, who pauses, who does not perform urgency, can have a genuinely physiological effect on the listener. It is why you may notice, if you are paying attention, that something in your body has shifted slightly since you began this audiobook. Not dramatically, but slightly. A small settling. A breath that arrived a little lower than the last one. That is not accident. That is co-regulation at work. Beyond relationship, there are somatic practices, body-based experiences, that speak directly to the nervous system's felt sense of safety. Physical weight is one of them. The sensation of something heavy and warm resting on the body, a blanket, a hand, the simple pressure of sitting back fully into a chair rather than perching at its edge, tells the nervous system something that words cannot. It communicates, you are held. You do not need to hold yourself up right now. The feeling of being physically supported, even by something as ordinary as a chair you allow yourself to fully settle into, is a genuine input to the threat system. A small one, but a real one. Temperature is another. Warmth, a hot drink held in both hands, a warm shower taken slowly rather than efficiently, sunlight on the skin, activates the same neural pathways associated with social warmth and safety. The body does not strictly distinguish between physical warmth and the warmth of being cared for. Both register, in the older parts of the nervous system, as the same fundamental message. Something here is gentle. Something here means you no harm. Safety is not only a thought. It is a temperature, a texture, a weight, a rhythm. The nervous system learns it is safe the same way it learned everything else, through the body, slowly, over time. None of this is instant. None of it is dramatic. The nervous system that spent years learning to stay alert will not unlearn that in a week of warm showers and slow breathing. But it will begin to shift. Gradually, imperceptibly at first, and then more noticeably. A slightly longer window before the anxiety rises, a slightly faster return to baseline after it does, a slightly greater capacity to sit in stillness without the urge to fill it. That widening, slow and quiet as it is everything. It is the whole work, and it is entirely within reach. In the next section, we are going to bring all of this into the architecture of daily life, looking at how the structure of your days, from morning to evening, can itself become a form of nervous system medicine, not through rigidity or routine for its own sake, but through the particular kind of rhythm that tells the body, again and again, that today is a day it can trust. Keep going. Section 9. Safe daily routines. Structuring your day to signal calm instead of urgency. Your nervous system is not listening to your intentions. It is not moved by your plans, your goals, your sincere desire to feel better. It does not respond to what you mean to do, or what you know you should do, or the version of tomorrow you imagined last night before you fell asleep. It responds to what actually happens, to the sequence of small, real, physical events that make up the texture of your days, to the first thing you reach for in the morning, to the way the hour before sleep actually unfolds, to whether your body receives any signal at any point between waking and sleeping, that today is a day it is allowed to trust. This is what a daily routine actually is at the level of the nervous system. Not a productivity tool, not a framework for getting more done. A sequence of repeated signals, small, consistent, embodied, that the body reads as evidence about the nature of the world it is living in. A chaotic, unpredictable, urgency-saturated day tells the nervous system one thing. A day with shape, with rhythm, with small predictable anchors of calm woven through it tells the nervous system something entirely different. Not through logic, through repetition, through the slow, accumulated weight of days that kept their word. Your nervous system is not listening to what you intend. It is watching what you do. Every morning, every evening, every transition. That is the language it actually understands. Let us begin with the morning, because the morning is where the nervous system sets its tone for the day. The first 30 minutes after waking are a period of particular neurological sensitivity. Cortisol is naturally rising. This is healthy and appropriate, a biological mechanism for alertness. But the rate and height of that rise is significantly influenced by what the body encounters in those first minutes. A gentle morning, light before screens, quiet before noise, something warm before something demanding, allows cortisol to rise gradually to its natural ceiling and to begin its slow descent at the right time. A morning that begins in urgency, the alarm, the phone, the immediate intake of news and messages and decisions, spikes cortisol higher and earlier than the body was designed for. And that spike, set at the beginning of the day, often never fully resolves. It colors everything that follows. This does not require waking earlier. It does not require a 2-hour morning ritual, or a cold plunge, or a structured meditation practice. It requires something far simpler. A few minutes of deliberate gentleness before the world is allowed in. 5 minutes of sitting with something warm before checking any screen. A window open to let in light and air. A single, unhurried breath before the day begins to accelerate. These are not luxuries. They are calibrations. Small adjustments to the starting conditions that compound, over weeks and months, into a nervous system that begins its days from a slightly steadier place. The middle of the day matters too, and it is where most people make the fewest intentional choices. The hours between morning and evening are typically the most reactive, driven entirely by what arrives rather than what is chosen. Email determines attention. Other people's urgency becomes your urgency. Tasks bleed into each other without pause or transition. The nervous system, running continuously at the pace the day demands, never receives a signal to lower its activation between tasks. It simply runs. What the nervous system needs in the middle of the day is not a break in the productivity sense, a lunch taken at the desk, a few minutes of scrolling, but a genuine micropause. A moment of intentional low stimulation between one context and the next. Even 60 seconds of deliberate stillness, standing at a window, taking 3 slow breaths, stepping briefly outside, acts as a reset. It interrupts the continuous thread of activation that otherwise runs unbroken from morning to night. It reminds the nervous system, in the only language it hears, that not every moment is an emergency, that the pace can vary, that there is, within this day, at least one moment that belongs to the body rather than the schedule. You do not need long pauses to regulate a nervous system. You need frequent ones. A minute of genuine stillness scattered through the day does more than an hour of rest saved for the evening. And then there is the evening, the part of the day that most directly determines the quality of sleep, and therefore the quality of every following morning. The nervous system does not transition naturally from the full pace of a working day into rest. It needs to be walked down, gradually, gently, through a sequence of cues that signal the shift from alert to at ease. Light is one of the most powerful of these cues. The blue light emitted by screens suppresses the production of melatonin, the hormone that prepares the body for sleep, by signaling to the brain that it is still midday. Dimming screens, or shifting to warmer light in the hour before bed, is not a wellness trend. It is a direct intervention in a biological process. The brain, receiving less blue light, begins to produce melatonin on schedule. The body temperature drops slightly. The heart rate eases. The system begins, slowly, to prepare for genuine rest. But beyond light, what the evening most needs is predictability. A sequence of small, repeated events that the nervous system learns to recognize as the approach of safety. A particular tea made in a particular way. A particular chair. A particular book. A particular absence of demand. The content matters less than the consistency. Because what the body is learning through the nightly repetition of these small rituals is not a habit in the ordinary sense. It is a cue, a signal, a whisper from the routine to the nervous system that says, this is the part of the day where nothing is required of you. You are allowed, now, to come all the way down. A predictable evening is not a boring evening. It is a safe one. And for a nervous system that has spent the day on alert, safety in the evening is one of the most generous gifts you can give yourself. The shape of your day is not a productivity question. It has never been a productivity question. It is a question of what signals your body receives, from the moment you wake to the moment you sleep, about the kind of world it is living in. Change the signals, slowly and consistently, and the body begins to form a different answer. A quieter one, a steadier one in which the baseline is a little lower, the recovery a little faster, and the ordinary moments of an ordinary day feel, gradually, genuinely, a little more like enough. In the next section, we're going to talk honestly about something that often goes unsaid in conversations about healing: how long this actually takes. and why the pace of genuine recovery is not a sign of failure, but one of the most trustworthy signs that something real is changing. Stay with me. Section 10. Slow healing. Why recovery takes time and why that's not failure. There will be a day, not far from now, perhaps, when you notice something small has changed. It will not arrive as a revelation. It will not feel like a turning point. It will be quieter than that. You will be sitting somewhere ordinary, at a table, by a window, in the middle of an unremarkable Tuesday, and you will notice that your shoulders are lower than they usually are, or that you have been in a room for 20 minutes without reaching for your phone, or that the low background hum of anxiety that usually runs beneath your day has been, for some reason you cannot identify, slightly quieter. And you will think, when did that start? That moment, subtle, undramatic, easy to miss, is what healing actually looks like. Not a transformation, not a before and after, a slow, almost invisible shift in the body's baseline, a fraction of a degree toward ease, and then another fraction, days or weeks later, barely perceptible, building so gradually that the only way to measure it is to look back over months rather than days and notice that the person sitting here now is carrying themselves a little differently than the person who began. Healing quietly is still healing. The absence of drama does not mean the absence of change. Some of the most significant shifts in the nervous system arrive without announcement. This needs to be said clearly, because one of the most common and most damaging experiences in nervous system recovery is the expectation of faster progress. We live in a world that has conditioned us to expect results on a visible timeline. 2 weeks to better sleep. 30 days to a calmer mind. The implicit promise of most wellness content is that change should be noticeable and soon. And when it is not, when the 3rd week arrives and the anxiety is still present, when the breathing exercises have not yet produced the transformation that was suggested, it is very easy to conclude that the approach is not working. Or worse, that you are not working. That your nervous system is somehow more resistant, more damaged, more difficult than other people's. Neither of those conclusions is accurate, but they are understandable, because nobody tells you, clearly enough, how long this actually takes. So let me tell you now, as honestly as I can. The nervous system changes through neuroplasticity, the brain's genuine, well-documented capacity to form new neural pathways in response to repeated experience. This is real. It is not a metaphor or a motivational claim. The brain physically rewires itself in response to what it repeatedly encounters. New patterns of thought, sensation, and behavior, practiced consistently, gradually become the brain's preferred routes, the well-worn paths that the nervous system begins to travel automatically, without effort, because they have been walked enough times to feel like the natural way. But neuroplasticity operates on its own timeline, and that timeline is not measured in days. A nervous system that spent years learning to stay on alert does not unlearn that lesson in a month of breathing exercises. It unlearns it the same way it learned it in the first place, through accumulated experience, repeated consistently, over a period long enough for the new pattern to become more familiar than the old one. Research suggests meaningful nervous system change typically requires months of consistent practice before it becomes the new baseline. Some people begin to feel subtle shifts in 6 to 8 weeks. Others take considerably longer. There is no right pace, and the pace is not a measure of effort or commitment or how much you deserve to feel better. The nervous system did not learn urgency overnight. It will not unlearn it overnight either. But every day that you practice something gentler is a day the new pattern grows slightly stronger than the day before. There is also something important to understand about the nonlinear nature of recovery. It does not move in a straight line. There will be weeks where something shifts noticeably and you feel genuinely different, lighter, quieter, more present. And there will be weeks, sometimes immediately after those good weeks, where the anxiety returns in full, where the tension is back in the shoulders, where the sleep deteriorates, where you lie awake at 2 in the morning wondering if any of it was real or whether you imagined the progress entirely. Those setback weeks are not failure. They are not evidence that the healing has reversed. They are a normal, expected, neurologically predictable part of how change actually works. The nervous system does not move smoothly from one state to another. It oscillates. It tests the old pattern against the new one. It fluctuates under stress, under illness, under the weight of difficult life events, retreating temporarily to what it knows before finding its way back to what it has been learning. The return to difficulty is part of the process. It is not the end of it. The most useful measure of progress is not how you feel on your worst days. It is how quickly you return to baseline after them. Early in recovery, a hard week can feel like it erases months of work. Later in recovery, the same hard week passes in a day or two. Not because the difficulty was smaller, but because the nervous system has built enough new pathways that it knows the way back. That increasing speed of return, quiet, unglamorous, easy to miss, is one of the most honest signs that something is genuinely changing. There is one more thing worth saying here, and it is perhaps the most important thing in this entire audiobook. You do not need to be fully healed to begin living differently. You do not need to wait until the anxiety is gone, until the tension has fully released, until the nervous system is perfectly regulated before you allow yourself to experience your life as something more than something to be managed. The calmer life does not begin when the healing is complete. It begins in the small moments of genuine ease that are already available to you right now, even in the middle of everything. The breath you just took a little slower, the shoulder you just allowed to drop, the moment of stillness you chose instead of reaching for the phone. You do not have to be finished healing to begin feeling better. The two things happen at the same time, in the same small moments, one quiet choice at a time. There is one section remaining, and it is the one I have been building toward since the first word of this audiobook. It is about what waits on the other side of all this work, not as a destination you arrive at once and stay, but as a quality of presence, a way of inhabiting your own life that becomes more available to you the more gently and consistently you practice. It is about coming home to yourself. Let's go there together. Coming home to yourself, what it feels like when your nervous system finally rests. There will come a day, maybe not today, maybe not next week, maybe not for a while yet, when you notice that you have been sitting quietly for some time, not waiting for something, not running through a list, not watching the door in that low, habitual way that anxious people watch doors. Just sitting, present, unhurried, existing in the room without needing the room to be anything other than what it is. And the quiet will feel okay, not empty, not suspicious, not like a gap between emergencies. Just okay, safe, yours. And in that moment, if you are paying attention, you will feel something that is difficult to name precisely, but that you will recognize immediately when it arrives. A sense of having returned to something, not something new, something old, something that was always there, underneath the noise and the urgency and the years of careful management. A self that was waiting, quietly and without complaint, for the conditions to finally allow it to come forward. That is what nervous system regulation actually feels like from the inside. Not the absence of difficulty, not a life without stress or sadness or the ordinary weight of being human, but a different relationship with all of those things. A steadier ground beneath them, a capacity to feel what you feel without being entirely swept away by it. A return, again and again, to a baseline that is yours, not the borrowed baseline of survival mode, not the recalibrated baseline of chronic overstimulation, but the one your body was always trying to find its way back to. Regulation is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of ground, something solid beneath the feeling, so that when the wave comes, you are moved by it, but not undone. It changes things in ways you might not expect. It changes the quality of attention. A regulated nervous system can be present in a way that an activated one simply cannot. When the threat system is quiet, the senses open. Food tastes more clearly. Music reaches further. Conversation stops being something you manage and starts being something you inhabit. The world does not change, but your capacity to receive it does. And in that receiving, ordinary life begins to yield something it had been withholding, not because it was hiding anything, but because you had not had the bandwidth to notice. It changes creativity. The particular kind of thinking that produces new ideas, unexpected connections, genuine insight. This kind of thinking requires a nervous system that is not in threat mode. The brain under stress is efficient and narrow. It solves problems quickly and misses everything peripheral. The brain at rest is expansive and associative. It wanders. It makes leaps. It finds the thing it was not looking for. Many people who recover nervous system regulation discover, quietly and with some surprise, that they begin to think differently, that ideas arrive more freely, that the creative self they had half forgotten, the one that used to play, used to wonder, used to be interested in things for no particular reason, begins, tentatively, to reemerge. It changes relationships. When you are no longer spending a significant portion of your relational energy on internal threat management, you have more left for actual presence, for genuine listening, for the kind of attention that makes other people feel truly seen rather than merely heard. A regulated nervous system is a gift not just to yourself, but to everyone who spends time near you. Your calm becomes, as we discussed earlier, a resource, something other nervous systems can borrow, something that makes the room feel slightly different when you are in it. When your nervous system finds its ground, the people around you feel it. You become, without trying, a source of safety for others, simply by having found it in yourself. And it changes the texture of time. This may be the most unexpected thing of all. When you are living in survival mode, time has a particular quality. It moves quickly, it feels pressured, and it leaves behind very little residue. Days blur. Weeks disappear. You look back over a month and struggle to identify what actually happened in it, what you actually felt, what actually mattered. This is partly a function of stress hormones, partly a function of the narrowed attention that survival mode produces, and partly a function of the fact that when you are always preparing for the next thing, you are never quite inside the current one. A regulated nervous system inhabits time differently. Moments become more distinct. Experiences leave clearer impressions. The day feels longer, not in a burdensome way, but in a full one. The way a day felt when you were a child, and time moved slowly because you were actually inside it, actually present, actually receiving each hour as it arrived rather than moving through it in a blur of management and anticipation. You will not live there always. Nobody does. Life will continue to bring difficulty, disruption, stress. Your nervous system will continue to activate in response to things that are genuinely hard. This is not a failure of the work. This is the work doing exactly what it was supposed to do, not eliminating the stress response, but giving you the capacity to return from it, to know the way back, to trust, even in the middle of a hard week, that the ground is still there beneath you and that your feet will find it again. The goal was never a life without waves. It was a nervous system that knows how to float, one that has learned, through practice and patience and 1,000 small acts of gentleness, that the water can be trusted. You have spent this audiobook learning about the body you are living in, about why it holds what it holds, about why the tension became normal, why the rest stopped working, why the quiet made you uneasy, why the habits that were meant to help often did not reach deep enough. You have learned that none of it was your fault, that your nervous system was doing its job, that exhaustion was not a character flaw, but a system under too much load for too long without enough recovery. And you have learned, I hope, that recovery is real, that it is available to you, that it does not require perfection or a perfect life or the elimination of everything that is hard. It requires only this, a willingness to begin, to take the small habits seriously, to offer your body, day after day, the quiet evidence that the world has become a little safer than it was, to be patient with the pace, to measure progress not in grand transformations, but in the slow, faithful accumulation of easier mornings, steadier evenings, and moments of genuine stillness that arrive, without drama, without announcement, and feel, at last, like coming home. Thank you for listening. Take good care of yourself. And remember, your nervous system is not your enemy. It is the part of you that has been working hardest, for longest, with the least recognition. It deserves your patience. It deserves your gentleness. And it is far more capable of healing than you have perhaps been led to believe. Rest now. You have earned it.